All right. Well, first off, thanks for joining me, Adam. This is Adam Didyk. I got to know Adam when I got to go over to the World Championships in 2013. We got to hang out and chat training a lot. Adam's one of the better young coaches in the world, I'd say. This past year, he had a lot of success with his athletes, namely Jess Trindgrove got third at the Commonwealth Games Marathon. And then another athlete he took essentially from coming back from a couple-year break to... what?
About 8 years off.
Okay. More than a couple years, about an 8-year break, and got her down to about a 9:34 steeple, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so again, Adam's another good young coach who actually is in Australia, but spent time in the U.S. running for Memphis. And me and Adam actually raced at some point, although we didn't know it at the time. But
No.
so
And I think you beat me too, which I'm not happy about.
So thanks for joining me, Adam. This is the first and hopefully a series of what I'll call Coaches Conversations, where just bring in other good young coaches who I think can add stuff to my blog, website, get them some exposure, and really just learn some things. So thanks for joining in on this experience, Adam.
Not a problem, Steve. Good to have a chat with you.
Definitely. Well, as I said, wanted to start with almost getting an idea of where your coaching knowledge background comes from. So to start with, I'm always intrigued by who your big coaching influences are.
I've probably had many coaching influences on different aspects of my coaching. So one guy that's really had a huge impact on the style of training I give out is definitely one of my old coaches, Sean Crichton. So Sean took me on very much late in my career, but it was the training that seemed to really work with me, and I seemed to really understand it quite well. I'd probably say my approach to my coaching probably comes from my very first coach, which is a guy called Tony Checker. So Tony was a guy who coached me from about the age of 13 to 16, but he had enough of an impact on me at that age that I've sort of kept in touch with him very much throughout my whole time, and certainly my time when I was in the US, I was still talking to him on the phone and sort of, not so much on always on the technical aspects, but more on the mental and my approach. So, his professionalism in the things that he does with his teaching as well as his coaching was just something that I sort of aspired to lead the same sort of, aspects in my coaching.
Okay. No, very good. Very interesting. And then I guess another big question is first off, how did you get started in coaching?
Yeah, my start to coaching wasn't really planned. I basically was out with an Achilles injury. I was about to go in for surgery and basically thought I'm not doing anything for 6 months. And I was sitting there chatting with a mate who wasn't overly happy with his current running situation. I just basically over dinner said, well, how about I coach you? And not really expecting much response. And he's going, yeah, that'd be good. I said, okay. So that was my first athlete, Toby Medlin. And basically that night I went home and wrote 3 months of training for him and got him from, he was about a 4:03 sort of 1500 runner, and he got down to 3:54 and won a couple of big races in South Australia here and took out state title and went on to nationals. So it was kind of nice to be able to work with an athlete at that level straight away too.
Definitely. Yeah, one of the things I like to always discuss is because I got into coaching a little bit of the same way. Injuries happen and you start looking at the other side almost accidentally. Is looking back in your first athlete, what are some of the things you did then that you look back on and are like, what in the heck was I doing? Why did I do that?
Yeah, to be honest with you, it's a tough one. I probably didn't learn so many lessons from that because maybe it was just at the point where I wasn't as reflective on my own practice at that point. But it's probably a year or two later when I started getting more athletes, and that was probably 5 or so years now. And I think one thing I really did incorrectly, which I've tried to do much better now, is transition athletes. So if they've come to me from another coach, is to really understand their training and continue on the the progressions that they were making with their coach. And then my style of training is very different to what they are used to, just slowly sort of getting them to that rather than, straight away going, okay, you're on a real speed-based sort of training program. Now we're going to put a bit more mileage into you and just expect that they're going to adapt straight away. I've certainly found that process takes a little while longer and probably affects their performance for the first year or two that you're coaching them. So I'd probably say that was the biggest thing to really influence the way I approach new athletes, but also just seeing how athletes sort of progress as juniors as well. My want for them to approach the running the same way I did was probably a little bit naive, and so when I look back, I kind of put the same pressures on them and expectations that I would have allowed my coaches to put on me. But sort of understanding that my attitude towards my running is very different to what some of the athletes coming to me had. That probably didn't work, and I lost a number of athletes in the early stages who went from really enjoying their running to then turning around saying, "Oh, this isn't really what I want anymore, and this isn't what I sort of signed up for." So some of those athletes sort of just left the sport, and I kind of take that responsibility on myself as going, well, if I sort of took the time to understand what they wanted and how they were trying to approach it, then I might have been able to help them out a little bit more. And I guess that's probably where the early conversation with the athletes, understanding their motivations, their goals. I ask every athlete now that I take on is, why do you run? And if they say, because I want to win this race or that race, I basically turn around and say, well, why is that important to you? Why do you feel you need to do that? Because I think when you start to understand that aspect of an athlete, you then can learn how to approach that athlete. So maybe not so much in the technical training aspect with some of my early athletes, but more my approach as a coach, I think, is probably what I needed to learn a lot at that stage.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably what a lot of young coaches go through. I mean, I know I went through the same thing a little bit. Is the technical knowledge isn't always the problem. It's learning how to apply and deal with individuals. And I think those are some very good points brought up. I know in the college world, one thing that, as you know, differs from most other countries, Australia, UK, and such, is you almost have all these abrupt coaching changes, high school to college, college to pro. It's just constant switch. And one thing I've noticed is that people don't take the approach that you just talked about in learning what the athletes did previously, right? Mm. So most college coaches get high school kids and never find out what they did, right?
Yeah. And it's not always, sometimes the athletes are very forthcoming with the information and it's very easy to work with them if they're quite knowledgeable about what they're doing. But other times, as long as the coach is happy enough, I'm more than happy to call them and sort of help with that transition. But, it's probably a very different environment over here where that, hopefully is starting to become accepted. But like you're saying, over in the US where it's kind of expected that once they leave high school, they'll go on to a college coach. I think in the US you've got a real opportunity to do that without too many issues. And I think any college coach who doesn't start, especially with athletes at that age, is probably neglecting the potential that athlete can have right off the bat.
Yeah, definitely. Well, very cool. And then also touching on another topic you brought up there a little bit, is you kind of talked about the individualization of motivation, right, and finding out what each athlete does. I'm always curious to know how you balance that need for individual attention plus have that kind of group dynamic going on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've had a group which has grown from obviously that 7 years ago to now my group's close to 40. So, managing that has been quite a challenge and quite a task. And I guess I wouldn't suggest I totally individualise every athlete's program. I sort of level my group in respect to their performance levels. So I have what I brand an international group and then an elite group, and those will all have 100% individualised programs, and that's probably around 8 to 10. And after that, I have a junior group, which again is very individualised to a certain extent. But then for the majority of the athletes who are, I sort of am very honest with them from the start to say, look, you have a generic program of what some of the elite guys in my group are doing, and we'll just sort of tailor the load to what you can manage and help you to progress through that way. And I think if the principles are in place and there's a good enough balance for the athletes, you can sort of tend to get them working on that. So I guess I have some athletes who probably have, I sort of work on an 8-15 sort of program, a 15-5 program, and a 5-10, and then plus to marathon. And so I can sort of find a good balance between that for the athletes to work in together. So it's not too often that athletes have to do workouts totally on their own, but at the same time, I'm not afraid to give that, and nor does that concern me. I think athletes need to get to a point where they can concentrate on their own and still pull out the performances they need in training. So I probably would suggest that the top level have highly individualised programs, where then below that we sort of just individualise the load, and they'll come in and join the sessions of what the other guys are doing.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I like that approach. And branching off a little bit into, I think you're in a kind of unique situation in that you work with athletes all the way up from the Olympic level all the way down to, junior athletes, which is something in the U.S. you don't see a lot of, right? It's more specialization. You're a high school coach, college coach, professional coach, or some variants of it. What are the major differences in approach you would take as a coach dealing with someone who's getting ready for, say, an Olympics or World Championships versus someone who's on the junior level?
Yeah, look, I think they're hugely different approaches. For the first thing is the elite athletes are really coming to you wanting you to help them get the best out of themselves, and so you can push them fairly hard, and they're pretty committed to accepting that. Whereas I think with the junior athlete, although some of them might be quite open to me to push them hard, I'm not prepared to. I see the very early stages of training as educational rather than performance based, and so my attitude to the juniors is, and certainly to their parents, which is something I have to obviously deal with because they have their interest in, and they want to see their kids do well. But for many parts of it, I have to sort of say, well, look, if you want them to turn into a champion straight away, well, don't bring them out with me because I'm not interested in doing that. I'm got more of a long-term picture, and so with the junior athletes, I very much look at it as they're training to train. So I'm trying to educate them so they know what to do when they get to an age where it's actually going to be quite worthwhile and beneficial for them. I also probably have a greater balance rather than specialisation for what events they're doing. So I'll still have a very high level of speed work as well as aerobic development for junior athletes, so that when they get to an age where they are starting to specialise in an event, they've sort of got the background to be able to choose which direction they want to go, and they're prepared and developed well enough in each way. But also just sort of very much with the junior athletes considering the social and emotional development. I don't want them being at an age where by 18, 19, they're veterans of the sport and have been doing the same thing for 6, 7, 8 years, or even in some cases 10 years. And so, whether I give them gym work, whether I sort of give them sort of external things to do outside of our training sessions really depends on their age and maturity, and also is very much trying to keep them safe from that, where they'll actually have a progression when they get older. Because if we get to 20 and we've got no more progressions, nothing more to add in, then we start to recognise that peak's going to be a lot lower than what we initially hoped for that athlete. So I guess I don't want athletes to be institutionalised where, for 8 years they've been doing the same thing, there's no change, there's no variation. And I'd like to always have it slowly building and developing. So what someone like Jess does is very different to what one of my younger athletes does. And what I'm happy to ask Jess to do in regards to committing to gym sessions, Pilates, massages, physio treatment, all the rest of it, is not going to be the same for a junior athlete. Even though at some points I could see they could benefit from it at times, I'm also just concerned about the total time commitment they give to it. So that's probably the biggest challenge I would face with the whole group, and keeping that attitude separate to each individual group, I guess.
Yeah, no, those are some very, very good points. I think that's a unique development picture that not a lot of coaches take, unfortunately.
And one of the things, I guess, with the progression of an athlete that I always say to people, something I've learned in the course over here is, the early phases of training is training to train, so giving them those formative years so they can then go on and do the training they need to when they're older to be successful. Then you go through the period of training to race, where you will start looking at more race factors and tactics and strategies and all those sorts of things. And then, when they get to their 20s or so, and they're starting to become high-level performers, you then start training them to win. So I hate to have one-dimensional runners who can't kick home, and I hate to have someone who's not strong enough that they rely on a kick home only, and they've got no strength to go out hard if they need to. So I guess that's the sort of factors that I'll put into their training as they get older. I will put in specific training to allow them to develop a kick, whereas, like I said, with the juniors, I sort of balance out so they have an equal amount of aerobic development as well as speed development without significantly focusing on strategy within their running.
Do you think that's been a problem in the past? Because I know, looking at Australian history a little bit, and even in the US you see this, is in the past there were a lot of really good junior athletes who didn't quite translate to the senior level. Do you think that's kind of a result of short-term thinking and not an almost early specialization of things and not keeping the big picture in mind like you're talking about?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I really think that I've seen many junior runners be outstanding, but you can see very much with their attitude and with the training they're doing and discussions with their coach that it's very much based on performance. And, you can't blame people for that. I mean, it's very hard to keep that focus on the education, and it takes a bit of discipline to do that, because in many respects you've got a situation where the coach, likewise as the athlete, gets excited by the results, and I think that's where, as the coach, it's really a responsibility, not the parent's responsibility, is to guide that attitude and to help them understand that, yes, whilst it's nice to have the results, the most significant factor is that you're developing effectively, and that's not to suggest that early specialisation is deterring their development, but I sort of feel that there's plenty of time for that specialisation, and I think that that early diversification, even playing other sports and including them within the training is really important too, because I look at strength and conditioning, I look at a lot of the injuries that athletes get at a senior level who have been running from an early age, and a lot of them are silly, niggly little injuries, which we now bring in a large degree of strength and conditioning. But if you consider if they were playing, Aussie rules football for one, but even American football, soccer, over here in Australia for women, netball is really huge, basketball, whatever, but they're getting a lot of strength and conditioning through those early years because they're doing things changing direction, they're jumping, they're landing, and their bodies are getting used to more than just running in a straight line. And I think sometimes when we do that, we fail to develop those control muscles that then support and stabilise us as we're trying to increase our running. So I generally find that a lot of that stability with athletes isn't there if they've not played other sports. So I'm actually quite a fan of them playing other sports up until an age where they need to start specialising. And I mean, with some of my athletes, one of mine who's quite a good junior, plays a bit of Aussie rules football, and if you've watched it, it's fairly contact driven. And so after getting a few knocks and not being able to train, he kind of goes, "Oh, look, I'd rather do a bit more running." So, but it's probably at the age where he can make that choice, and I think that's also where we have to remove adult-driven goals and allow the juniors to understand what they want to do and make those choices when it's appropriate to them as well. And sometimes there's a point of us guiding them, but I don't think we need to force that.
Yeah, no, those are some very good points. I think that's some good coaching lessons there, because there's a lot of mistakes made at the junior level, whether it's by the athlete, coach, or even parent, that end up hurting the kids long term, whether they stay in the sport or not. It can be very...
Some coaches are brilliant junior coaches and can play a huge role in developing an athlete and then working with a senior coach to then take them on and take them further. But there's some coaches who their attitude and attributes that they bring to the sport are just sensational for junior athletes. And, I'd love to see more of that occurring with that knowledge and understanding that they're developing them to move to a program that may be able to help them get to a high performing level. And it just also allows groups to form to support that attitude as well. That's often been an issue with what I do is the fact that I don't want juniors to come out and feel like seniors. I want them to feel like they're juniors. I want them to laugh and muck around, have a bit of fun with it, so that they enjoy it and continue to come back. And then when they're at an age they want to take it seriously, then that's there for them. So that's always been a tough balance as well.
Yeah, definitely. So after talking about juniors for a bit, I want to switch to your higher level athletes a little bit. And often we talk about what it's like for an athlete to go through an Olympic Games or World Championships and all that stuff. But I'd like to get your take on what it feels like as a coach to go through that, have an athlete go through that process. Because us coaches, I know going through it with you a little bit, us coaches can get the same anxiety, nerves, all that good stuff. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that process and how you deal with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is a very challenging aspect of coaching, and probably one that when I first got into coaching at that level, probably didn't respect it as much as I should have. But I guess probably a real simple approach to it is taking that to the angle of, the athlete's a very emotionally driven person in those final stages of preparation and prior to competition. And I kind of see that I've got to be the common sense at times, and not that that's the athlete's not capable of doing it, but there's a sense of I need to help them do what they need to do, and they're going to try and choose to do what they want to do. And I found that athletes, as they go through this process, improve that greatly if that conversation occurs and you assist them with that. But as a coach, definitely go through the same anxieties, go through the highs and lows. And I say to my athletes, I'm not just here for the good times, I'm here for the tough times as well. And sometimes they can be pretty tough, and you spoke about Jess Kringo's third at the Commonwealth Games this year. I mean, there were points there where, maybe I never shared it with Jess, but I was concerned that she'd even get to the start line with a few injuries that were going on in the early days. But I guess right at the end of the day, in those final stages, it's about trying to be as relaxed and calm, because the athlete will sort of mirror that a little bit. And so if you're going in there stressed and anxious, then that can often be mirrored by the athlete as well. And it's funny because I remember the comment Jess made to me just before she started warming up at the Olympics. We managed to she managed to find me in the crowd near the warm-up area, and she said, "Oh, you look really nervous." And I said to her, I was really hoping that wasn't going to come across, and I really wasn't nervous. And I said, "No, I'm not nervous. I'm just excited because I'm looking forward to what you're going to be able to do today." And that was one of the key things. And I honestly felt that way. I was really disappointed. She thought I looked nervous because I was actually really excited. I wasn't nervous at all. I just knew that was a day that was going to be a good day. And I guess I've tried to take that approach into things is, as I've been exposed to those opportunities to travel, the Olympics was one, World Championships last year in Moscow, and even this year in Commonwealth Games. I think if I reflected on my own performance as a coach at those events, I probably improved each time, where my anxiety about certain things didn't occur as easily as it had in the past, and I became calmer and had a greater understanding of my athletes at that point too. And I think sometimes it's what I really appreciate about what they've done here in Australia by giving me that development coach opportunity in Moscow, because I don't think I would have learnt enough about Jess by looking at it from the outside as being right there with her. And seeing how she prepares in those final stages, not just physically but also mentally and emotionally. And I think that was a real factor for me this year in Glasgow, where I knew sort of things that were going to come up, but I knew how to approach her on it too. And it's probably one of the strengths Jess and I have had, is that we've had that real great understanding of each other over the past 18 to 24 months, and it's probably where she's become quite comfortable in those situations, and I have likewise around her. And then with Madeline Heine, she actually handled herself very well. And I don't spend that much time with Madeline. She's based in another state to where I am, but we get on the phone and we talk fairly regularly, and so I had a good understanding of her as well going into that. So Could I apply the same principles and approach that I do with Jess? Or at times, yes, but at times, no. It needs to be individualised to how the athlete approaches their running and approaches those situations. And both of them, are very classy in the way they handle themselves. And so I think that really helps at the end when they go to get on that line and feel confident and comfortable in their environment.
Very good. And I guess piggybacking on that a little bit. So your athletes, both Madeline Heiner and Jess, are at a level where I'd call it you're on the brink of competing against some of the East Africans, right? Same with some of the athletes I work with is you get to that brink, that point where you're starting to have those conversations. What do you think are the key factors, key things to not only get your athletes, but get Australians, Americans, British, non-East African countries able to get to those performance levels where we can start being in the picture consistently?
I think it's our approach and our attitude towards competing against them. I mean, there's no reason why we can't beat them. I think that anyone who suggests that there are reasons needs to just get the work done and approach it differently. Certainly there's some physiological factors from attitude and all the rest of it, but at the same time, with the technology we have today and with the opportunities we have, there's no reason why we can't be achieving the same outcomes with what we do. I think also it's not being afraid to contest the win with them. It's one thing I was proud of both Madeline and Jess at the Commonwealth Games is they didn't even recognise that there was an issue. They just said, well, I'm here to race, and if I want a medal, if I want to win, I've got to put myself in the position to do that. Whether they're East African, German, Italian, who cares? It's not relevant. The only relevance is that they're on the start line next to you and they're a competitor and you've got to try and beat them. So I don't see why there should be an attitude towards it. And yes, they're obviously showing through history now that they're extremely talented, but there's no reason why with the approach that we have, and there's potential that we could be doing things better than them. So I don't see why we call ourselves short. Basically, through what we can achieve with potentially the technology we've got as well as our information and knowledge, then there's many things that we can do to improve. And I often like to think that Americans, Australians, we might overthink things at times, but that may also help us to have the details there to take care of the specifics on race day. And sometimes that may not be occurring with East Africans, and unless they've got some really great guidance. So it's all part and parcel of it. It's our approach to it, but also being smart and respecting them, but just taking them on as any other competitor.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fabulous point, because I think you almost have like this psychological block that forms with athletes where it's, I'm competing against all the non-East Africans, right? And they almost elevate the East Africans to this platform above them, and it becomes this untouchable group that, you can't touch. And if you just take the time to actually somewhat try and step up and fight and get in there, you never know what happens. And I think you see that with a lot of the really successful athletes. I mean, on the women's side in the U.S., examples like Molly Huddle are great. Someone who just mixes it up, or Shalane Flanagan. And you see success when they put themselves in the position to do so. And it elevates their performance, I think, because they realize I can actually be here. So I think it's...
You've got to race like you race everyone else, really. I mean,
if
you're going for the win, you put yourself in the position to do that. I think sometimes we get too complacent and just put ourselves at the back of the pack and watch the race unfold and never put ourselves in it. So, I'm very proud of the way the athletes I work with approach that, and hope that they can start taking a few scalps from time to time and enjoy that opportunity as well. But they're only going to be able to do that by putting themselves in that position.
Definitely. All right, maybe one or two more questions. First off, I'd like to know, coming from the Australian system, having run in the American collegiate system, having talked with me a little bit about the American system of training and all that good stuff, what do you think one thing Americans could learn from the Australian system? And then vice versa, what do you think the Australians could take away from the Americans?
I think probably one of the things I like about our approach in Australia is there is a focus on development, whereas too often I saw in the US where athletes would go to college and there wouldn't be such a recognition for the fact that they're going to run on past college. And I know certainly in my case, my teammates were going to me, I was talking about races when I was getting home, they go, "Are you going to continue to run when you get home?" I said, "Yeah, of course." I never even thought anything of it, and most of them, I guess, I don't know if it's due to tuition and getting that covered at college or anything. Probably think once my college career is over, it's done. But then also, I think we have much different opportunities for post-collegiate level athletes. Whereas in the US, I saw that, and whether it's improved since I was there didn't seem to be too much more in regards to track. You basically had to start running, road races and those sorts of things. And so it's just a different post-collegiate sort of ideal, I guess. I think one of the things that the US also could potentially learn, and again, I think it's more a factor of college scholarships and all the rest of it, is just taking it a little bit easier on some of the juniors. Because there was often a situation where I saw, 100 mile a week in high school, and I'm sitting there going, 100 mile a week is probably not what anyone in Australia is doing until they're at a senior level. And it would need, if someone's 100 mile a week as a junior, you'd be shaking your head and going, "That's a bit insane." And I sort of recognise that some of that happens over there to put people in positions to get scholarships to be able to get into the university they want to. So I see that's kind of circumstantial. But something we could probably learn from the US is basically the culture around running over there is awesome. I loved it. I loved the environment at cross country races. That was fantastic. The professionalism in the high school level of coaching and sort of, I guess, having a culture where it was actually just as important as any other sports team. And I think in regards to Australia, we don't quite have that. And I think there's sometimes too much of a focus when you're a junior, and then I'm talking about much younger at the age of 12, 13, where there's a lot of state championships and even nationals for that age group. But by the time you get to sort of 17, 18, there's not that many participating in the sport. Whereas it's a very different case in the US, where through high school, you've got a great competition standard there. And I think the approach to races, people sometimes over here, maybe it's just in the state where I'm at, where I look at it more specifically, is don't approach it with the attitude that you do in America, where, when I get on the start line at Chili Pepper, where I raced you, is close to 300 people and we're just attacking it. Where I just see it's a little bit conservative over here, and it's probably a bit of a shock to the system when you first run in those sort of competitions and you go, "Geez, I've just dropped a 61 second first 400 and I'm about 60th." It gives you a bit of a shock. Whereas over here, if I dropped a 61 the start of a cross country race, I'd be 100 metres in front. So it's just a very different approach to running, and I think I like the college system, but I think as long as it's approached with the right attitude and acceptance of the athletes' long-term goals, then it can be a fantastic pathway for athletes to take, and even for Australians to go over there, and give them some of those years where it's quite hard to transition from junior to senior, and that doesn't seem to be the issue. From junior to senior, that transition is made fairly comfortably, whereas here in Australia, the numbers drop off quite considerably, and the opportunities likewise. And that's basically because people go to university, their time requirements are larger, and being part of a college track team is not exactly on the cards for them, and they go into work and all the rest of it. So, when you're trying to commit to a sport fully, it becomes very difficult.
Definitely. All right. Well, I think that does it. I think you made some very good points there, and I hope that viewers of this interview, blog, webcast, whatever you want to call it, enjoy it and take away some good lessons. I think you definitely dropped some good knowledge there, Adam. And as we've talked before, I love your approach, and I think you're on the right track, and I love watching what your athletes do. So appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No problem, Steve. Enjoy the opportunity. Thank you.